the 11th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Luke, beginning to read at the 42nd verse. But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and herbs of all kinds, and neglect justice and the love of God. It is these you ought to have practised without neglecting the others. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love to have the seat of honour in the synagogues and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without realizing it. One of the lawyers answered him, Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us too. And he said, Woe also to you lawyers, for you lead people and load them with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not lift a finger to ease them. Amen. When reading our Bibles and following the life and ministry of Jesus, it is so very easy to forget or overlook the central reason for his need to live amongst us and to teach us not only of God's love for us, but also of God's expectation of the way we conduct our lives. At the time of Jesus, in God's eyes at least, the Jews, his chosen people, a belief long held by the Jews, had forgotten or were disregarding the obligations placed upon them in the original covenant with God. As a nation, they had fallen into the trap of concentrating on the externals, the outward show of religious observance, and ignoring, or in some cases rejecting, the core of the covenant, to love and serve God, and to love and care for others. Those others exemplified by Jesus in his word, neighbours. Led by the Pharisees, over many years they had formulated a very narrow view of what constituted the correct observance of that love of God and the conduct of their daily lives. And that view was bound up in a myriad of rules and regulations. By keeping these rules and regulations, it allowed a freedom to conduct other aspects of their lives in ways that were the very antithesis of Jesus' message. Selfishness and a contempt for other people, Gentiles. Just one or two examples. It is then totally unsurprising that again, led by the Pharisees, many Jews rejected all that Jesus lived and taught. But perhaps that was to be expected if we compare all that Jesus taught: love, kindness, justice, generosity, actions within our lives which we believe brings us God's approval and blessing. If we compare them with the belief that one needed to simply ritualize religious observance using only special vessels in certain ways, special water in a specified amount, fasting, and public display of piety, all examples for them of obtaining the right relationship with God. The tensions between the Pharisees, self-appointed arbiters of ceremonial law, and Jesus are more clearly set out in the Gospel of Luke than in any other Gospel. Our earlier reading is but one example, and it is worth noting that it is only recorded in Luke. Not surprising, perhaps, when one considers that Luke was himself a Gentile, and tradition has it that he wrote his Gospel to explain the life and ministry of Jesus to a wider world than Israel. Thus the need at times to explain details of Jewish belief and customs that would have been considered unnecessary to the other Gospel writers, or even those in the crowds who followed Jesus. An explanation, perhaps, of why there is in Luke's Gospel as many parables as there are in the other three Gospels combined. Many believe that the outstanding characteristic of Luke is the appeal to all people. Jesus Christ is there for all without distinction. The Gospel universal in all respects. One eminent biblical scholar once asked, "Can you recommend a good life of Christ?" To which the scholar gently replied, "Have you tried the one that Luke wrote?" It is then perhaps stating the obvious to suggest that both in his aim and in his style of writing his gospel, Luke highlights the tensions and the differences of religious observances between Jesus and the religious authorities of his day. In the end, of course, such disputes and disagreements come down to one particular point. From the religious authorities' point of view, all religious beliefs and actions were based on visibility, an expectation that all religious forms and observance were seen by others, a validation, as already suggested, of personal piety. Jesus, by contrast, maintained that unless personal actions and personal worship came from the heart, they held no weight in God's eyes. His avowal of sharing love, compassion and care for others must be heartfelt, or it will count as nothing. His words, "I came not to abolish the law, but to maintain the law," reflect an observance of that law from a deeply held belief, rather than simply exhibiting a ritualistic observance for all to see and all to approve. An early example, perhaps, or perhaps an acknowledgement that in history nothing ever changes, an acknowledgement of the norms of today's social media. There, a need to conform to outward signs of virtue that meets approval is not always followed up by action that comes from a genuine desire to care for others and to follow as well as one can the teachings of Christ. The tensions between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day remain with us in our society today in one form or another. Nothing changes. Amen.